All right, let's get started so we can use the full time today. So welcome everyone to the Ask the Trainers session for Module 3 of Dissemination Essentials on Plain Language. We have your trainers here with us today, Denise and Georg, who are going to answer any questions you may have on the topic and also reflect on what they've seen on the Learning Experiences platform. So your comments on the exercises and other things you've posted there. We invite you, because it's a kind of small group, if you'd like to turn your webcams on to make it a bit more interactive, as if we're all in the same room together, you're more than welcome to. If you have any questions to ask, you can do so via the chat, which we'll be monitoring as we go along, or you can unmute yourself and ask it verbally if you prefer. We didn't receive any questions directly through the Learning Experiences platform this time. So if any of you have questions you'd like to ask live today, please go ahead and do so. But to kick us off in the meantime, while you think of any questions you might have, we're going to turn it over to our trainers to give their reflections and thoughts on some of the things that you were sharing on the platform. So over to you both, Denise and Georg.
Right. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. As Stephanie said, we wanted just to have a look at some of the comments that people made and see what you all said. Firstly, there were several comments on some of the words that were used in the quiz. And some of you disagreed slightly with what the meanings were. But the main comment really was that context and audience are important. So as with everything, if you know who you're writing to or writing for, then you can tailor what you're writing accordingly. So one of the words in particular was placebo. And somebody suggested that that was very much used talking about medicine. And in fact, it was in the example we gave. But it might not always be. But again, that does depend on who you're writing for. And then in the chat in the last session, there was quite a lot of discussion about placebo and whether it was a word that was commonly understood or not. And the sense in the room, as it were, was that it was a word that you would need to describe. You couldn't just assume that everybody who was reading what you wrote would know what it meant. I don't know. I'd be very interested to know what you think about that. And I'd be very interested to know if you have a good definition of placebo, because one of the suggestions was it was a sham treatment. And somebody said that they thought sham wasn't particularly simple either, which is probably quite true. So does anybody want to comment on that? Does anybody have anything to say?
Last time we had suggestions like fake treatment as well, but then that sounded quite kind of negative. And people, and I think some of the comments on the platform also, if you look, I got a bit of an impression who people write for, and there was one example of someone writing mostly towards healthcare professionals, and then that's different, of course, again, compared to writing for a total lay audience who might never heard any slightly technical terms. So, yeah, placebo is one of these words.
Yeah. Georg Ursula Griebler has put a comment in the chat saying you suggested to use the active voice, but in German that's often not used. So what would you suggest there?
Well, I would suggest to use it. I would suggest to use it in 3/4 of the cases. I mean, since we've prepared this course and I've talked about the active voice and the passive voice, I realized how often I use the passive voice myself. And then I was like, oh, but here it actually works quite well, and it would be kind of complicated to use the active voice. But in stuff I go over, I edit, that I sometimes get a lot of passive voice, like one passive construction after the other. And I don't think you have to get rid of all of them, but just it gets also, besides having all these disadvantages we talked about, it's also just a bit tiring if every sentence is in the passive voice.
May I ask, because when I write, for example, this review investigated blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So for me, it always sounds a bit wrong because the review itself didn't investigate anything, but the authors investigated. But if I write it correctly, then it's already so long. So therefore, the passive voice is a bit more elegant somehow, and you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think I know what you mean, but I think when we talked about the passive voice, that I also tried to give you examples where it's actually good to use a passive voice, right? And I think there's lots of examples where you can use a passive voice because you don't know who wrote it, or it's not interesting who wrote it, who did it. And with as a regard of the review investigated, I don't know. Would you not do that? I know it's a bit like the review doesn't really do anything. It's the people who write the review who do the thing. But I think I use that relatively often. That I say the study investigates this and that. But maybe that's just a judgment call, like so many things. Would you not do that?
We used it now because it's short and easy, but in my feeling, it's not really correct.
Yeah,
but probably it's just my own thing.
But you always have the option of saying that the authors of the review investigated X, Y, Z.
Olivia, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to add that. So I think a lot of people get stuck with plain language or lay language. It needs to be made shorter, which has been said a couple of times already, but you don't need to make the sentences shorter. It's just making them easier. So sometimes you need to use more words than just one word. But say you'll find some of your sentences will be shorter using lay language, but then some of them might have to be made longer.
Yeah.
So if you're saying so in the study we reviewed, so then it's like not the study reviewing, it's the study in the study we reviewed. So it's like you're still saying what you did. So it's active voice. You're taking ownership of what it is that you've done.
Yeah, I agree. I think we found in the plain language summary project that it took more words to write something in plain language than it did to use sort of more complicated language very often. And that is an issue if you're writing a plain language summary because you have a word limit. So you have to write it within a certain limit. So sometimes that you do need to keep it short. I can see why that's an issue.
You can use
especially if your threshold for jargon is quite low, right? If you need to explain placebo and a lot of other things, control.
Yes. Were you going to say something else, Olivia?
I was just going to say, because with word limits, that's when you can use contractions. So instead of saying we could not, you can just put we can't, because people often think, oh, we need to use Queen's English.
Yes, I agree, and that keeps it more of a chatty sort of conversational style as well, which is easier for people to read.
As you speak.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Would you do that in plain language summary as part of Cochrane review?
Yes.
You would use can't instead of cannot.
I would. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's
didn't
good to know.
That kind of thing. Yeah, we didn't find any studies, for example. Yeah.
I didn't even know that wasn't Queen's English.
I bet the Queen says it, Georg.
Does the Queen always say did not? Yeah.
No. Well, I don't know.
Did not.
I don't know her, funnily enough, but I bet she does say that. And Olivia, thanks for your definition of placebo. That's useful. Does anybody have any questions about any kinds of active voice or passive voice or anything like that? Any more comments? I can't see everybody all at the same time, so it's difficult to see whether anybody's got a hand up. Okay, so somebody else in the comments talked about readability. I think it was Amy put one of our sentences through a readability tool, and it came out, she thought it was quite high. And Georg had some points to make about that. Do you want to take over, Georg?
Yeah, sure. It was Amy who came out with a grade 10 level, which I thought wasn't too bad.
Okay.
What was our original aim? Grade 8 or something? Yes.
Yeah.
So we're still school age, at least.
Yeah.
So as we said in the module, these readability scores, they all kind of differ, but they tend to use word length and sentence length as a important measure. And then also word frequency, I think, is part of many of these readability scores. And with writing about Cochrane issues, health issues, you just often have to use these words, and then they drive your score up. I wouldn't worry too much. I mean, if you get a really low score, then it might be worth trying to look again. And like I said, like I mentioned in the course, when I write for online, our WordPress content management system has this plugin that basically tells you that you have 10 sentences that are more than the suggested 20 words long. And here they are, so it even highlights them. It's quite practical. And often when I think that I've edited everything 5 times and it should be really the final version, and then I put it into the system, and then this little frowny thing comes up and says there's still these issues. It's also kind of fun to then get it to like a neutral phase, and then possibly in the end to a happy phase, and then and often I go to the sentence that I highlighted and I think, sorry, nothing I can do. But sometimes I think, oh yeah, actually you could easily rephrase this or split the long sentence up into 2. So these things are they are helpful, but I wouldn't get too stuck on oh, I want to be at grade level 8 and I'm only managed to go to grade level 9. So.
Yeah. So it's a useful tool, but it's not the be all and end all.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. So we also had some comments about deciding on appropriate language, and somebody suggested that it's really important to get input from a consumer within the patient community that you're communicating with, and we agree with that. If you can do that, then that's fantastic. And somebody in Singapore said that, and they plan materials for the general public to use, they check with the health promotional board to see what medical terms they use, and if they use the same words, then they're fairly sure that a lay audience will understand. And that's one of the things that we suggested in our presentation, was that if you use patient organization websites, or you can ask somebody who's a consumer or who doesn't know much about the topic, and they can tell you whether they understand what you're talking about. And the NHS website in the UK is also very good for plain language explanations of conditions and illnesses and treatments as well. Yeah. So another thing was the PLS template. We had a few comments on that. And I really liked one of the comments, which was from some Emma. And she said that she finds it hard to rewrite something that has already been written. So a really good idea is to write down the main points and then imagine you're explaining it to somebody else, so that you can sort of put it into your own words. And I think that's a really good tip. And Olivia, who's already contributed today, also suggested to try and use Anglo-Saxon words instead of Latin-based words. And I think that's a really good idea as well. And also, Olivia, in an email you wrote to us, you suggested using song lyrics perhaps as a basis, which I thought was fantastic.
Well, it's to make you think of if you're using active or passive voice. If you think the easiest one to think of is the Proclaimers.
Yeah.
Say, I will walk 500 miles. They don't say, I am going to go and walk 500 miles, which would be the correct.
I'm going to consider to.
Yeah. So, and a lot of artists do that.
Yeah.
So it's a way to sort of think about it that way. Makes it but easier to think what is active and what is passive.
That would be an interesting study, actually. Like analyze song lyrics of I don't know, top 40 songs, or I don't know how you select them, and then see how much passive voice is being used in those. It's being used. So how much passive voice they use.
I don't think they use very much. I think one of the most common words in pop songs certainly is I. So if you're talking about yourself all the time, I think this and I love you and I this, that and the other, I think you probably won't get that much of it.
I and you. But with what you about this point of like not trying necessarily to rewrite something that's quite complicated until it's finally not that complicated. I thought of the issue of translation as well. So when we translate, or I translate for example, a press release, because quite often I don't want to write my own because there's already an English one, and hopefully that has been double checked with the authors and everything, so I know what's in there. The authors are going to be happy. If I write my own one completely from scratch, then I might get something wrong. So I sometimes translate them, but it's really difficult to get then stuck on this. And I use, obviously, I also like to use Google Translate or something, because it's just, if it's a page long, by the time you do it all yourself, it takes it's a 1 second job for DeepL and a long typing job for me. But then, of course, you also have to really pay attention that you don't leave it that way, because at least from English to German, for some reason, it produces extremely complicated sentences that are kind of like, wound up the wrong way. And I don't know, they're correct. They're not incorrect German sentences, but they just sound a bit strange. And on the first look, you can go over that and just think, yeah, there's nothing wrong with the sentence, I'm going to use it. But it's really worth it, like sitting back a moment and thinking, is this really the way I would explain it? And then you have to do the same thing. So yeah, and even then, maybe if you still struggle, then try to just get rid of that weird paragraph where you don't even, sometimes I don't even know what's weird, but it just sounds strange. And then just take out the main points of it and try to come up with your own version of it.
And that comes on to another point, that it's quite hard work writing in plain language. You have to keep going over it and editing and thinking about it, and then leave it for a while and come back to it. And then, as we said before, if you can get somebody else to read it, then that's
yeah, someone commented that she thought she always took 5 times as long as anyone else.
Yeah. But it does take a long time. It is a slow job. We have another question from Ursula. Is it okay in a lay summary to explain a technical term and then use it throughout the summary? Yes, I think it is. I certainly would do that. I mean, it would depend what the word was. If it was a really sort of very, very technical word that was sort of 3 or 4 words long, and there was a nice succinct plain language way of saying it, then I would use the technical term and explain what it was, and then I would use the easy plain language term. But if, as in your example, sedentary, your plain language explanation might be much longer than sedentary, then I would definitely use sedentary once I've explained it. Yeah. I think that's fine.
Especially if the review is about, if that's the main thing, the review is about, if this is about how interventions to get people off their butts and leave the sofa and go into the woods or something.
And the problem is, in German, the word sedentary lifestyle, it sounds so terrible.
What is the direct translation?
Sedentäre Verhaltensweisen. So we would use the same.
Okay.
Yeah, it's really strange, and I don't think that anybody understands that. But the other thing is to write always about that somebody should not lay down too much and not sit all the day long. I mean, that just takes very much space, and is I don't know, too.
Yeah. How about, I don't know, talking about a couch potato or something that people might have heard before, where they, one word, it's very colloquial, but
it's very colloquial. So not everybody might understand that.
No, maybe not. I don't know. But sometimes if you can find something that's a bit more colloquial, but basically sums up what you're trying to say, I think, I don't know. I sometimes feel in Cochrane, when I read texts, they're often very reserved and desperately trying to be super correct, but I think sometimes a little bit more letting go would do them good.
That's a good idea. Thank you.
I don't know, but that's my personal impression. Maybe Stephanie's going to write me. No, she doesn't look angry. Okay.
No, I think that's fair enough. We had a question in the comments last time. What's Cochrane's definition of lay language compared to plain English? And Georg and I had a discussion about that, and we thought that plain language is plain English is something that you can use in any situation, really, and lay language is not specifically not using technical terms because you're writing for people who won't understand them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so plain language is more about the language structure and things, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you were writing, even in, lots of people have said to me, well, should we be writing reviews in plain language? And I think, well, yes, actually, you can write in plain language as long as you're using, you know, short sentences, and don't use a massively complicated sentence structure if you can get away with something a bit simpler, and don't use huge long words if you can say something more concisely. But you can still use the technical terms because your audience will understand them. Whereas if you're writing for a lay audience, then you need to take all of that into consideration. So you do need to explain if you're using any technical terms. And I think that's the difference.
And you always need to do both, right? I mean, writing something in lay language, you could only use lay terms, but then make terribly complicated sentence structures. That's not helpful.
Yes. Yes, you could.
I can comment on that from the perspective again of non-native English speaker. People who write Cochrane reviews, I'm talking about proper reviews and authors, their expertise is in research and research methodology, not so much in writing, even for native English speakers. And of course we invite and welcome, you know, authors from all around the world, and it's extremely difficult to write succinctly and elegantly and plain, as Denise said, for someone who is not a native speaker. You know, even for native speakers, that's a difficult. It's easier just to, you know, put a construction which is like saying what you want to say, but it doesn't say it well. You know, and what to speak about people who aren't native speakers. So it is really challenging. I mean, I wonder, how to help that, how to facilitate that elegant writing. It's a skill, isn't it?
I would suggest reading the plain language summary guidance, which I think is helpful. At least I think it's helpful to get that in. But seriously, there is lots of guidance on writing in plain language. There's lots available on the internet. There are books. There's all sorts of things, and it is always a skill that somebody can learn, but it's not an easy skill. And some people don't have the facility for it, in the same way that I don't have the facility to do statistics, and I never will have. But I know that I could ask somebody. Then I guess somebody who's struggling with writing in plain English could also ask somebody for help. So if they have a consumer or somebody who they know writes well, or they think writes well, then they could ask them.
Yeah. And writing in plain language about a Cochrane review or something, you're not going to get the Pulitzer Prize or something like that. Or you don't have to, but it's really
no.
Like you said in the beginning, that a few rules, just looking at a few rules, it can make a huge difference, and it doesn't have to be fantastic prose. If it is, I mean, if you're good at it, even better. Yeah. I
think what you're aiming for is for people to understand what you're saying without noticing how you've explained it. They shouldn't be looking at your writing and going, "Ooh, that's good," but at the same point, they shouldn't be looking at it going, "No, I don't understand that. I'm not reading any more of that. It's too hard."
Yeah.
So you need a balance. Yeah. Does anybody have any questions now? Anybody would like to make a comment on anything?
Don't be shy.
Okay. Last time we had an illustration of a way that you could present information graphically. So, Georg, would you like to show your screen and show those?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, there was a question about how you can use graphics. What's the?
And while you're looking at that, Montserrat has just said, where can we find resources for plain language in different languages? Well, that's a question we had last time, Montserrat. And what we said to people who were on the call was, I don't have any because I only write in English. Georg might have some in German. But if you wanted some in other languages, perhaps that's something that you could find and you could contribute to us, and we could build a resource that has plain language information in lots of different languages. I think that would be really helpful. So I wouldn't know where to even begin looking for plain language resources in French or Spanish or Portuguese, say, or Chinese. But if anybody has anything, then please send it in and we'll try and put it together.
I could ask Juliana again, who maybe she has
Juliana might have something.
Idea, because I think she's quite good in languages. I think she speaks Spanish and I don't know, French, German, and English.
Yeah.
and she's been leading the whole translation work for quite a while. So maybe she knows something. If she has something, I'll post it on the platform. Yeah.
But also, I think that Juliane was translation coordinator. Now it's Judith. But in principle, Cochrane geographic groups have the responsibility to promote Cochrane's work and evidence in local languages, and that includes translating, reviews and knowledge translation products into those languages. I think that Cochrane groups should be those generators of these kinds of resources that would help. That's a natural thing to me, I think.
Right. So geographic groups and fields. And maybe see if I have can get in touch with them.
So I'm going to show you this infographic. So the question we had on the platform was specifically about communicating risks and using graphics to do so, because it's often quite difficult, right? Relative versus absolute risks and stuff like that. And one that I found which helped me to understand the ins and outs of the rapid testing for COVID. There was a big review which got a lot of attention as well. And I think it was the authors themselves that created these graphics. I'll show them to you if I can. Yes, I can. And they're here. Let's see. No, you disappear. No, I still see you. Do you see them?
Not yet.
Oh.
I think it says you've started screen sharing, but it's not showing yet. There we go.
Oh, comes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it the many green and red dots? Yeah.
Yes.
That you see. All right. So they create these two graphics because the whole way how rapid tests for COVID, they always have these issues with false positives and negatives, and it's really a mind bender for me to keep in mind, to like always remember what is what and what does it mean. And then it's also important to know the prevalence of COVID, for example, in this case, in the population. So if there's really just a few people who have it, then you get more false positives, and so on and so on. And I thought, actually, last time I showed this, I realized that this is still relatively complicated, but it makes it a lot easier to understand. So that if you, it basically shows you 1,000 dots, and it shows you that out of these 1,000 dots, you have a 20% prevalence. You will have the red dots that are actually infected, and the green dots are actually not infected. And then it shows you, for a given sensitivity and specificity of a test, it shows you how many false negatives and how many false positives you're going to have. And then in comparison, if you have a lower prevalence in the population, so if only a few people have it, then suddenly the proportions of false positives and negatives can change quite dramatically. So in this, up here you had much more false negatives, and suddenly here you have more false positives than false negatives. And I think I kind of liked it. I'm not sure I explained it correctly now, but things like that can definitely help a lot to communicate risks. And yeah, and about risk, the other rule is to, where you can, to always use the absolute numbers instead of like, but that's a basic rule of science communication, to not use the risk was 5% higher, because if your basic risk is super low, then 5% more doesn't really make a huge difference.
No.
That's
great. Thank you.
Does anyone have any last questions? I think we're at time. If anyone has a burning question, they can type in. Oh, the final question in on the final hour from Theo. Who would like to?
Well, that's a good question, Theo. You obviously can't use them in plain language summaries, and not at the moment. And that's something we'd like to do in future, but it depends on a lot of things. But if you have if you're doing a blog shot, or you have infographics, or a visual abstract for your review, then you could use them in that kind of context.
Yeah, I think in this example for the testing, they had the same facts and the same examples as in a text, but then it's still like a whole paragraph of reading, like if you have 1,000 people and so many are actually infected, you get this and that. It is easier or more, and also more impressive if you get a graphic like that. And this one is from a Cochrane Evidently blog article, for example, and I think they also used it in a press release when they released the review. Definitely helps, but it's a lot of work too.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, well, that brings us to time, everyone. Thank you so much again to Denise and Georg, who are our lovely trainers for this month. I learned a lot about plain language, more than I thought I needed to know, and I feel pretty confident walking away now. So thank you both so much. And thank you to all of you for joining us today. There's a big break, or there's a break, maybe it's not that big, between now and our next session, which will be in September. And the topic of that session is how to structure your information. So it's a bit more on the designy side of things, which should be fun. So I'll be sending out an email in the next week or so to send out a couple surveys. We also need to choose a topic for our November webinar. We have some content already developed for that, but there's an option to hear from you and what you might like to discuss for our last module of the course in November. So stay tuned for that survey. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your days or evenings, and look forward to seeing you again in the fall.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.